Alberta Primetime with Michael Higgins.
Welcome to Alberta Primetime. Ahead tonight, our politics panel on the go-ahead for another round of redrawing Alberta's electoral map. But first, calling time on the changing of clocks.
Let's remember, we talked about this in 1971, we talked about it again in 1983, we talked about it in 2017, and we talked about it again in 2021. We're of the opinion it was time to stop talking about it and to take some action and get her done.
And get her done means the government is preparing legislation to remain on daylight time permanently. That's even though a 2021 referendum saw a slim majority of Albertans voting against such a move. And joining us now to discuss potential ramifications of the decision is Dr. Michael O'Toole, Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience at the University of Calgary. Dr. O'Toole, good to meet you, sir. Welcome to Alberta Primetime.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Okay, you're actually in favor of ditching the time change, locking on one time for the entirety of the year, but it's not daylight time.
Yeah, that's right. People like me who've been studying circadian rhythms have been advocating for about 30 years to stop flipping our clocks twice a year. I think that's a practice that's time has come and gone. It's really not serving its original purpose. But yeah, you got to pick the right time. And for Alberta in particular, that right time would be the more natural standard time.
All right, so then maybe paint us a quick picture of sticking, if it is that we're sticking to daylight time, paint us a picture of what that is and the point at which it might trigger concern for the average Albertan.
So a lot of people know that when we spring forward and fall back, that leads to some acute harms. We're pretty tired for a few weeks after that time change, and there's some increased rates of accidents and health consequences with that one. But that's acute. That lasts just for a few weeks. What we're talking about with being on daylight time is being misaligned for 5 months of the year. So our circadian clock telling us that it's too early to wake up, too early to go to work, too early to learn at school. And it's going to be really hard as those days get shorter and those mornings, the dawn gets later as we move through November into December. So right now, even the end of October, a lot of people are noticing that it's hard to wake up. And that's going to get a lot harder through November and December. That's something we haven't experienced as Albertans. This has never been done here.
Now, how might that translate into potential health concerns?
So we know from large-scale studies looking at where you live in a time zone, that the later your sunset, the less sleep you get and the less healthy you are. So people that live on the eastern edge of a time zone wake up earlier. They go to bed earlier. They get more sleep, and they're healthier. People on the western edge go to bed later and seem to have higher rates of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, obesity. And they all have to get up at the same time and go to work and go to school at the same time. But it's the going to bed later when you have a later sunset that has health consequences.
You mentioned going to work. How do you then maybe view potential impact on the business community, employees in general?
Yeah, so it depends on what kind of job you're in. But people working those regular 8 to 4, 9 to 5 jobs are going to find it harder getting into work. They're going to find it harder to be productive those first few hours of the day because your body is still telling you should be in bed, you should be asleep. This is too early to be up. For people who work later in the day, service industry, restaurants, they'll probably be fine. But it's the 9 to 5 jobs and teachers, students, these all run on that sort of 8 to 4, 9 to 5 schedule.
Given your expertise, were you ever consulted by the Alberta government ahead of the decision now being made to move to daylight time?
I did talk to the service minister's team a few weeks ago to tell them a little bit about the history and the unique features of Alberta that would make this decision different here than other jurisdictions. So in the United States, they have fairly short days compared to what we get in the summer, and their days aren't as short as ours in the winter because they're further south. So the consequences for them aren't as severe as in Canada, and because Alberta has 2 of the 3 most northern cities, with Edmonton and Calgary being so far north, that the implications for us, we have much shorter days in winter, are going to be more severe than any other city in Canada, with the exception of Saskatoon, but they don't change their clocks there.
Okay, so you gave them some insight, maybe a bit of advice. How was it received?
I thought positively, although when I gave them my recommendation, it's different than where they seem to be going with their new announcement this week.
All right. As you may be aware, we're a show about politics, and obviously we're immersed in some pretty charged political times in this province at the moment. How do you see locking on daylight time potentially impacting that dynamic, the partisan divide?
Well, the divide is interesting because we looked actually at the results of that referendum they ran in 2021, and there's a divide in the province based on where people lived and how they voted. So people on the eastern edge, like Lloydminster, really voted in favor of this. And where they live, it's actually probably a good thing for them. But other places on the opposite side of the province, like Grand Prairie, find this really, really hard. So it's more of a geographic divide.
It appears the government will be taking this forward.
Healthiest thing. Unfortunately, a lot of society don't get to choose their hours, and those are the ones.
Process, especially given there will be no public consultation this time around.
Of course, it's going to be what the final product looks like. This weird process where the produced votes. You know, they do with that map. They're just going to try to add two more.
Sarah, decision goes. To what degree do you see that being a concern from a democracy standpoint?
I mean, the decision between there are going to be more than 5,000 people that will change their minds either way. Pain of this, even just, adults. But honestly, I don't go to the ballot box to elect the government to decide things by referendum. I'm going to the ballot box to elect people to make decisions on my behalf. I don't think that we need referenda on every single issue. That is actually, in my opinion, more or less passing the buck, putting it back to the people. We're kind of in the mess that we are in as a province because of the idea of putting things to a referendum. So I don't want the issue. We don't need this. This is why we have elections. This is why we elect MLAs. Let's just accept this. There are people who live in more northern parts of the world who, either have more sunlight or more dark, you know what I mean? We'll get used to it. We just need to keep going. There will be people on the side of science on either side. Let's move along.
All right. Time for us to take a bit of a break. But when we come back, the PM unveils a new advisory council ahead of trade talks. More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. With Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. gearing up for renegotiations in July, the Prime Minister has unveiled a new Trade Advisory Council.
I'm very pleased to have that group. It's in industry.
He's done to stoke fear and destroy.
Politicians and along with holdovers from the previous version, new faces at the table will include former Conservative leader Erin O'Toole and Conservative Cabinet Minister Lisa Raitt. Sarah, I'll start with you this time. Given the makeup of this committee, what does it suggest where strategy and approach to is concerned? And do you see Mark Carney's fingerprints all over this?
Absolutely. The multi-partisan approach to the composition of this panel, I think will be very well received by a majority of Canadians who see him putting different kinds of voices at the table that go beyond political ideology of left or right, who are interested in helping Canada achieve the best deal possible under the banner of Canadian unity. And I like the composition of the panel, and I love that Erin O'Toole is on it. I think it's really hard for Pierre Poilievre to come out and just, use words like catastrophic. That's kind of more of the same from him. Didn't really work so well in the last election. I don't think it's going to work well this time for him either.
Rob, this new committee replaces Justin Trudeau's previous Council on Canada-U.S. Relations, a group that included notable Albertans like Rachel Notley, Arlene Dickinson, Peter Terzakian. What's to be made of how Alberta lands with this new advisory council?
Well, look, ultimately it comes down to whether this government can get an agreement in place. I think the rest is kind of window dressing. I don't think Canadians are going to be thinking too much about who was or wasn't on this council if things go sideways with the Americans. I agree that I think, showing that there's sort of a bipartisan approach here, that we're not locked into a certain kind of thinking, probably bodes well going into all of this. And I think it is a powerful message to Canadians. So I think ultimately we see what Alberta's interests are and the priorities that Alberta's premier has placed on making sure that energy is at the forefront of a lot of these conversations, that we see it as a point of leverage. So I think that's more where you see Alberta's interests tied up in all. It's really up in the air where all of this is going, and there's a lot riding on this for the Prime Minister to come out of all of this with something. Look, already this week we hear that the Americans are sort of putting conditions on just being at the table, that they want to see some concessions from Canada even before negotiations begin. So it just shows how precarious all of this is, the pressure that's on Canada in all of this. And remember, we're dealing with a president who negotiated CUSMA in the first place. So it sort of speaks to the volatility and the unpredictability of the Trump administration's approach here. So the idea of having all hands on deck is as much as possible, that we're open-minded going into this. Hopefully that bodes well.
Sarah, Erin O'Toole, Lisa Raitt, well-known former Conservatives. What do you see them bringing to the table to this discussion?
Thoughtful dialogue, a different political perspective, all interests of getting the best deal for Canada, for all Canadians, from coast to coast, north to south, east to west. That is what this mission is. It's for me, this goes beyond political affiliations. It goes beyond where you were born, in which province, where you live presently. We are, in this issue, we are all Canadian. This impacts every single one of us, from Newfoundland and Labrador to Vancouver Island. This is something that really matters to us as a nation. And on the Alberta perspective, we have an incredible advocate, I think, in our premier. She and the prime minister have developed a relationship. She has proven to herself to be a very, very valuable advocate for our province in different ways, not only domestically, but also with Trump. And so I feel very confident in the group that he's put together and what we have happening here at home in Alberta.
Rob, last 30 seconds to you. We heard reaction from Pierre Poilievre a moment ago. Sarah referenced those comments as well. But how much of an opportunity is there here for the Conservative leader to make hay on his messaging for how to move forward in dealing with the Trump administration?
Well, I think it's important for Pierre Poilievre to show that this matters to him, that he wants to see this resolved, that he's not cheering for failure here. So I think it's important that he maintain that tone. But at the same time, I think it's fair to criticize this government. What have you done to advance this file so far? And what about on other areas too? I think there's a narrative here about a year of rhetoric, but not a lot in the way of results. So I think that's where the Conservative leader needs to remain focused, just on saying, how has Carney made your life better? As opposed to, sort of predetermining that he's failed on some of these issues, or not being seen as being on Team Canada. So there's a fine balance there.
All right. We'll have to leave it there. Great to see you both. Thank you for this.
Thanks.
Thanks, Michael.
Ready? Set.
This is Aiden's favorite kind of afternoon, just being outside and playing. This kind and gentle boy finds joy in simple, calm moments.
3, 2, 1.
Born in 2015, Aiden loves playing with his favorite toys, riding his bike, or listening to music. He also loves sharing time with others.
Here they come.
At school, Aiden receives support for his learning needs. He's made great progress in expressing himself through pictures, gestures, and words.
What color is this?
Orange.
Yes.
He's also so proud that he can count up to 20 and write his name.
N. Aiden. Good job.
Aiden deserves a forever family, a loving, nurturing home to support him as he grows up.
For more information, go online to alberta.ca/Wednesdays-child.
Proudly supported by CTV.
Now, here are a few responses to a recent story posted by CTV News. It's about Prime Minister Carney's recent address ahead of CUSMA negotiations and how it might affect those talks. Loretta says, personally, I'm not concerned at all with trade with our neighbors. We just need to be patient. We have other trade partners in the meantime. And remember, Trump won't be in the Oval Office much longer. But Lisa disagrees. She writes, it will really screw up negotiations, just like the tariffs. And now he is screwing up the CUSMA deal. Kyle says this, Trump is not giving Carney anything. Well, another Kyle writes, Canada can go trade anywhere it wants. If America is a bad trading partner, then why try and get a deal? Have your say. Email us anytime at comments@albertaprimetime.com. Coming up tomorrow, routing for a new pipeline, including reports Ottawa now prefers a southern path to the BC coast. We'll get perspective from industry insider Richard Masson on Thursday. Until then, have a great evening, everyone, from all of us at Alberta Primetime. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time.